It's Saturday, and it's midnight. Turn the lights off, grab a flashlight, check the locks, and get ready to spend the witching hour with Greg. After dark.
In the summer of 1986, in a quiet, double-family home in Pittston, Pennsylvania, Jack and Janet Smurl were sitting in their living room when the temperature suddenly plummeted. A foul, suffocating odor filled the air like rotting meat and burning sulfur. Then came the sound, a rhythmic, heavy pounding coming from inside the walls. Moments later, their young daughter ran down the stairs screaming. Something invisible had grabbed her off her bed and flung her across the room. This wasn't a movie set. This was a blue-collar neighborhood in northeastern Pennsylvania, and for over 15 years, the Smurl family lived through what demonologists and investigators would call one of the most intense, violent, and relentless home hauntings in American history. If you've got spooky stories of your own to share, or you just want to say hi, you can write in at fiendandgreg@fiendandgreg.com, or you can visit the Greg After Dark page at www.fiendandgreg.com. You're going to find us here every Saturday at midnight for Greg After Dark. So, to understand the Smurl haunting, you have to realize that Jack and Janet Smurl were ordinary, deeply religious, working-class people. In 1973, Tropical Storm Agnes flooded eastern Pennsylvania, forcing Jack and Janet to rebuild their lives. They bought a double-double home on Chase Street in West Pittston. Jack's parents lived in one half, Jack, Janet, and their 4 daughters lived in the other. At first, it was just minor inconveniences. A stain on the carpet that kept returning no matter how many times it was scrubbed, tools disappearing off Jack's workbench and showing up in some locked drawer. Then, in 1985, the activity escalated from annoying to malicious. The initial disturbances were the kind of light and fluffy annoyances that you get at the beginning of every good horror film. The family noticed strange sounds like scratching and knocking at the walls, phantom footsteps echoing when nobody else was upstairs, radios turning on and off by themselves, and toilets flushing autonomously. Then, also, like in every good horror film, came the escalation. The house began to smell. Out of nowhere, a stench would blanket a room, part rotting flesh, part rancid waste. Rooms would experience sudden drops in temperature, regardless of the thermostat. Appliances would mysteriously catch fire, and pipes would burst without cause. It was pretty inconvenient. But by 1986, the entity wasn't just hiding in the shadows. It was attacking. The family dog, a German shepherd named Simon, was repeatedly beaten and thrown against walls by unseen hands until he cowered in fear of entering the house. Jack Smurl reported being levitated out of his bed and thrown across the bedroom. On multiple occasions, both Jack and Janet claimed they were physically and sexually assaulted in their sleep by a dark, shapeless mass that smelled of death. Desperate for help, in January of 1986, the family turned to famous paranormal investigators. I'm sure you've heard these names. Ed and Lorraine Warren. nightmare at the double block house on Chase Street in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, exploded out of a quiet residential neighborhood and straight into a full-scale media circus. So, after enduring more than a decade of escalating weirdness and about 18 months of outright terror, the Smurl family called in the Warrens. Now, the claim is that Ed Warren stepped into 330 Chase Street and immediately reported a massive 30-degree temperature drop, claiming he witnessed a heavy mattress lift and shake on its own, along with a dark, menacing mass coalescing in the hallways. The Warrens officially declared that the home wasn't just haunted. It was occupied by a triad of minor spirits and one exceptionally powerful, hostile demon. Up until the summer of '86, the Smurls had mostly kept their private hell behind closed doors. That all changed on August 19th, 1986, when a local newspaper, the Wilkes-Barre Times-Leader, published a front-page expose detailing the family's ordeal. And the story went viral nationally. Overnight, the quiet West Pittston street turned into a sideshow. Sightseers, journalists, and curious onlookers lined the sidewalks, gawking at the duplex. It was around this time that the public was learning the full disturbing extent of what the family alleged was happening behind closed doors. The phantom animal grunts and the blood-curdling screams. You know, that on top of their 75-pound German Shepherd being assaulted and, the physical and sexual assaults of both Jack and Janet. As reporters swarmed the neighborhood, tensions started to boil over. Local briefings turned into shouting matches, and the family tried to demand the media leave them alone. And then, enter Hollywood. Yeah, even Hollywood took notice. Jason Miller, the Scranton native who played the iconic Father Damien Karras in the 1973 film The Exorcist, actually visited the Smurl home in August of 1986 just to check out the commotion. While he didn't endorse every supernatural claim, he expressed deep concern that the media circus and the infestation were destroying the family's lives. By the fall of 1986, the backlash and scientific skepticism began in earnest. Prominent skeptics, including scientists and researchers, slammed the Warrens for preying on a family under extreme psychological stress, labeling the entire ordeal as a hoax or a mass delusion fueled by suggestibility. Critics also pointed out medical history factors, noting Jack Smurl had undergone surgery related to memory issues, which skeptics argued added to the fragility of the situation. Despite claiming they wanted privacy from the media bombardment, the Smurls partnered with local newspaper writer Robert Curran and the Warrens to pen a definitive paperback account of their nightmare. Titled Haunted, One Family's Nightmare, the book was rushed to publications and hit shelves in December 1986, cementing the case into paranormal lore. And when the story broke in the Wilkes-Barre Times-Leader in August 1986, the neighborhood reaction went through distinct phases. Initially, when reporters swarmed the streets, several local neighbors came forward to state that they had noticed strange things. Some reported hearing inexplicable loud banging, crashing, or shouting coming from inside the Smurl duplex late at night, or seeing strange lights flashing inside the home when the family was away. But as the media circus swelled into a daily mob of 80 to 90 reporters, camera crews, and rubbernecking sightseers blocking all the traffic on Chase Street, the neighbors' attitudes changed drastically. The overwhelming disruption turned the local community hostile towards the media and increasingly skeptical of the family. Many neighbors began publicly dismissing the claims as attention-seeking hoaxes or a desperate bid to escape mounting financial pressures, wishing only for the circus to pack up and leave their quiet street alone. But regardless of what the neighbors were saying and what the newspapers were saying, there were people who had to live with it. Remember how I mentioned that Jack's elderly parents, John and Mary Smurl, were sharing the double-block duplex house? They lived right on the other side of their shared wall. Jack's parents reported hearing many of the same strange localized phenomena: unexplained banging, heavy footsteps pacing through empty rooms, foul phantom odors, sometimes like rotting meat or sometimes like heavy perfume, and sudden drops in temperature. Because it was a duplex, the grandparents were frequently dragged into the day-to-day chaos, corroborating that the noises weren't just in the heads of Jack and Janet. Their 4 young daughters dealt directly with the escalation. They reported hearing disembodied voices calling their names when no one else was home, seeing dark shapes manifest in their bedrooms, and, in one of the most violent claims, experiencing a force that allegedly threw one of the children down a flight of stairs. Everyone remembers the heavy hitters of the paranormal world. The poltergeist, the shadow man, the classic Hollywood-style demon with glowing eyes and sulfur breath. But when Ed and Lorraine Warren finally packed up their holy water and stepped across the threshold at 330 Chase Street in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, they didn't just find a random, angry haunting. They found a crowd. According to the Warrens, the Smurl home wasn't dealing with just one isolated entity. It was ground zero for a full-scale spiritual occupation. 4 distinct spirits had set up camp inside that double-block house, running the gamut from minor nuisances to being a full-blown predator. Let's break down the uninvited guests. Guests number 1 and 2, well, the Warrens identified them as a pair of relatively low-level entities just floating around the property. An elderly woman who seemed entirely confused, wandering the hallways like she was trapped in a memory. And a young male spirit. Harmless, right? Wrong. In a house like this, even the passive spirits act like static electricity, feeding the atmosphere of constant low-grade dread. The family would catch the distinct smell of heavy, cloying perfume drifting out of nowhere, or hearing phantom footsteps pacing a room that was supposed to be completely empty. Guest number 3, the incubus. This is where the haunting takes a vicious, deeply personal turn. The Warrens claimed a malevolent incubus had anchored itself primarily to Jack and Janet Smurl. This wasn't just a bump in the night. It was a physical aggressor. The family's ordeal involved horrific claims of physical and sexual assaults that left them bruised, exhausted, and living in a state of absolute psychological siege. Imagine closing your bedroom door, trying to sleep, and knowing you aren't safe in your own bed. And finally, number 4, the master. At the top of this dark hierarchy sat the heavyweight, a powerful, dominant, demonic entity that Ed Warren described as ruling over the others with absolute malice. This wasn't a ghost looking for closure. This was an entity whose entire goal was systematic destruction. tearing the family apart piece by piece, driving them out of their minds, and claiming the house as its own personal hunting ground. Jeez, think about that for a second. 4 distinct presences, sharing the walls with a completely normal, unsuspecting family, just trying to live their lives, eat dinner, and watch some television. So, the Warrens brought in priests to perform exorcisms inside the home. During one ritual, witnesses reported hearing demonic roars echoing from inside the walls, light fixtures shaking loose from the ceiling, and temperatures dropping so low that ice formed on the inside of the living room windows in July. When it came to handling the entities at 330 Chase Street, the Warrens did not experience a quick or clean victory. They spent months investigating the home, gathering what they claimed were audio recordings of rapping, knocking, and dark shadows. However, tackling the primary entity proved extremely difficult. Ed Warren stated that the main demonic presence inside the house was very powerful and dangerous. When the Warrens and religious figures tried to intervene, the activity pushed back. It wasn't just dropping the temperature in the room. It started shaking mirrors and furniture, and even caused a mucus-like smoky substance to materialize on a mirror with a message telling Ed to get out. Well, that would do it for me. Yep. Nice seeing you. Bye-bye. There were multiple attempts to clear the house, including blessings and formal exorcisms performed by priests. They all didn't do a great job of ridding the duplex of the activity. After the exorcisms, the house went dead silent for 3 days. And then the entity returned, angrier than ever. Janet noted that the entity seemed to evade the rituals by shifting back and forth through the shared walls of the double-block homes or following them elsewhere. And I was wondering if the Warrens happened to take anything out of the house and bring it to their museum, but unlike some of the other famous cases where physical objects like Annabelle or other cursed artifacts were removed from a location and locked away in their occult museum, there's no prominent record of the Warrens hauling any specific cursed physical artifact away from the Smurl house to display. Instead, their primary takeaways from the Chase Street duplex were investigative evidence, primarily the extensive audio recordings of unexplained noises. They had photographs and a lot of detailed case files that later helped fuel books and media projects about the hauntings. So what do you do with a duplex that's entirely full of demons and spirits? Well, apparently nothing. In 1987, unable to take the mental and physical toll any longer, the Smurl family packed up and fled the house on Chase Street. So what actually happened in West Pittston? Skeptics argue that the family was under immense financial stress and crafted the story for fame or money, pointing to the book and movie deals that followed. However, neighbors and journalists who stayed overnight in the house reported hearing the strange wall pounding and smelling the inexplicable odors themselves. Could it have been toxic mold, methane gas leaks, or infrasound from nearby coal mines causing hallucinations and physical illness? While it might explain the confusion in smells, it doesn't quite explain objects flying across the rooms in front of multiple witnesses. So, to this day, church officials and the Warrens maintain that malevolent forces were at play. A dark entity that fed on the family's fear until they broke. So the Smurls moved away. And you might be thinking, oh, somebody's got to move into that place after. What the hell are they going to go through? Well, absolute silence. In February of 1988, a woman named Deborah Owens moved into the former Smurl home. Given the massive national media circus, the book deal, and the involvement of the Warrens, reporters eagerly tracked her down to see if the demonic infestation had been experienced by her or remained in the walls. Her report was entirely anticlimactic for ghost hunters. Owen spoke to local reporters and stated that, very plainly, that she had never encountered anything supernatural, strange, or abnormal while living in the house. Furthermore, occupants living on the other side of the double block structure reported that nothing unusual ever happened on their side either, after the Smurls departed. So the stark contrast between the Smurls' terrifying decade-long ordeal and the total peace experienced by the people who moved in afterwards became one of the primary arguments used by skeptics. It fueled heavy speculation that the haunting was driven entirely by extreme psychological stress, mass hysteria, suggestibility, or a hoax, rather than an anchored physical entity attached to the building itself. To paranormal believers, however, the narrative remained that the entities were uniquely tied to the Smurl family line, or that the house had finally gone quiet after the overwhelming amount of prayers, blessings, and media exhaustion cleansed the property. So there's the question that hits on one of the most fascinating theories in paranormal lore. When a house goes completely dead silent for the people who move in afterward, well, demonologists and ghost hunters are forced to ask, was the house haunted, or was the family haunted? In the case of the Smurls, researchers like the Warrens firmly leaned into the idea that there was something specifically about the Smurl family or their life circumstances that acted as a magnet. There are two prevailing theories from the paranormal community, and they paint a very different picture of why that house became a battleground. So they often argue that intense, prolonged hauntings require a specific type of human fuel. The Smurls were a large working-class family living under a massive amount of financial, domestic, and emotional pressure. Paranormal theory suggests that negative or high-stress emotions, they act like an open beacon for predatory parasitic entities. To an incubus or a malevolent force, that kind of vulnerability is an easy entry point. Critics and skeptics looked at this exact same angle but flipped it. They argued that the extreme stress, exhaustion, and suggestibility of the family created a hothouse environment for mass hysteria or shared hallucination. But to believers, that same stress is precisely what attracted and fed the entities. So, on the flip side, why would a haunting be so intensely, violently personal, featuring physical attacks and psychological warfare, if it was just random? The Warrens suggested that the Smurls were targeted precisely because they were deeply devout, practicing Catholics. In demonological lore, hostile entities don't mess with people who are indifferent. They go after people of faith because tormenting them is seen as a way to mock or break their religious convictions. And because the grandparents lived right on the other side of that shared wall, some researchers theorize that the entity latched onto the family bloodline or specific trauma or history within the family tree, following them rather than the physical structure at 330 Chase Street. So if you look at it that way, it completely changes the vibe of a story. If the house itself is just wood and drywall, moving out fixes the problem. But if the spirits were locked onto them, well, that means you can pack your bags, leave the house behind, and still bring that nightmare with you in the moving van. Well, whatever took root in that double duplex on Chase Street proved one terrifying point. Sometimes, home is the last place you feel safe. Well, that's all the terror we have time for tonight. Thank you for joining us after dark. I'm your host, Greg, and we'll be back every Saturday at midnight to help ruin your sleep schedule all over again. So if you want to email us, it's fiendandgreg@fiendandgreg.com, or visit the Greg After Dark page at www.fiendandgreg.com. And remember, keep the lights on, keep your eyes on the shadows, and never answer when somebody calls your name from the dark.